Hi, this is Dee, and you are listening to my podcast, Let Me Clear My Throat. In this episode, we're going this is a very, very serious conversation and subject. And it is very, very triggering for me in a lot of ways. And I know a lot of people, I have talked about my grandson being killed and dying. And he actually passed away in 2016. He passed away on my birthday, and they really don't know what happened. There was just a lot of speculation and a lot of confusion. So they said that it was possible. They didn't say it was a fact. They said it was possible that he had died from shaken baby syndrome, and that they wasn't for sure, but it was possible that that was the case. Um, so I'm going to go over some stuff that I printed out from American Association of Neurological Surgeons, and I want to go over this. And I am probably also going to probably obviously talk side, my own conversation as well with you, like I normally do actually. But this particular subject is very, very difficult for me. And I have been actually putting it off a little bit to talk about because, for one, I needed to make sure that I was in the right mental frame of mind in order to deal with this subject. And here lately, I've been going through a lot of transitional stuff with myself that I spoke about in several of my other podcasts, actually. And I am in counseling right now, and I'm on physical therapy right now, and I'm also seeing a doctor on medication. I have been through, I've been to hell and back, point blank. When my grandson passed away, um, it severed so much, um, and it's hard to describe the impact of his situation, his death, and the whole case and everything behind it. I have spoke about in my other podcasts how the trauma, um, it literally almost killed me. I was a successful, educated woman, had 3 degrees, 4.03 honors. Um, I was I was cleaning crime scenes actually at that time, and I had my own home, owned it for 14 years, had my whole life, a couple vehicles. I had my life mapped out. I had my stuff together, and I got a phone call from my oldest daughter that the baby was in the hospital. I thought she was talking about my granddaughter because my granddaughter had just got out of from having heart surgery about like a week prior to that. She had just got home from the Ronald, or my daughter had just got home from the Ronald McDonald House where my granddaughter had heart surgery. Um, so I was kind of confused. And then when she told me it was the baby, then obviously that was very shocking and mind-boggling to say the least. Um, but I'm gonna go over this, and then if I can handle it, I'll elaborate more on my life and the situation at hand. Because obviously, even though it even though it devastated me as a I mean, I ended up losing my home. I lost everything I owned. I lost my vehicle. I couldn't work. I lost everything. I lost myself. I live with scars up and down my arms from depression, where I subconsciously without noticing, would pick at my skin really bad. I actually had to wrap my arms up in ace bandages at one point to try to get my arms to heal. I picked up my arms, my neck, my face, my whole chest would be bruised all over it from where I pick at it, and just pinching myself. And I didn't even really notice I was doing it. It was my anxiety or and everything. And I just really wasn't even noticing I was doing it. And I ended up becoming homeless for 2.5 years. And I lived in my van. I lived on the side of the road, truck stops, hotels, hospital parking lots, Walmart parking lots, Meijer parking lot, um, friends' driveways, occasionally my parents' driveway. Um, I was allowed to stay with them uh, twice a week in their driveway. Um, and at that time, I usually would come here and take a shower, or whatever. Um, but contrary to what I went through, it severed, um, it severed so much in this family and in my family. Let me put it that way, my family. And I talked a little bit about some of it in my podcast, Postpartum Depression, um, about some things, um, and also in my podcast of family bullies. And it's very, I don't even know how to explain it. It's a very delicate subject. So I know I've already spoken for like maybe 7 minutes into this, but I don't know if I'm psyching myself up to talk about it because my anxiety is pretty high tonight. There's a lot going on in my life, some big changes and stuff that have been happening, not only with myself, but with my family. Um, Not so much as, and I say this in respect, you know, I take care of my mom, which I've spoken that several times. I take care of my mom. My dad passed away a couple years ago. He was my stepdad, but he was my dad. And I don't want to say stepdad because then that belittles, like, no, it doesn't belittle to me, but to some people, I feel like if you say step something, then it just makes it less of the importance of who they are, and that's not right. Um, but he was and always will be my dad, even though he's not my biological dad, or he wasn't. Um, he was all I knew, really. And he and I had a very close relationship, and I miss him terribly. But I moved in with my mom. I mean, I was already staying here, but I was living in a camper out back because when I ended up buying a camper about 3 years ago, I got it from a gentleman. Him and his wife sold it to me like really cheap and on payments because at that time I was still homeless living in my van. And it's a 27-foot camper, and he sold it to me for a wonderful deal. And so, anyway, I was living in my camper at the time, and I was homesick. And I know this is off subject, but I'm going to kind of give a little bit of background on things. Um, and I just happened to be home that day sick when my dad passed away. I had to give him CPR and everything, and it was just a big old mess. Obviously, very devastating. And so my mom, she is blind and bedridden now. She wasn't at the time. She was blind, but she wasn't bedridden at the time. And so I was a therapist for autistic kids, and I had to leave my job to take care of my mother. And I have not since, I have since obviously been taking care of her. I have not been able to really go out to my camper much because I have to stay in the house with her because I have to make sure that, with her being bedridden, it's a lot of responsibility. So I say, he was my dad. Okay, so we're just gonna leave it at that. But then, you got your parents' family, which is you and your siblings, and then your kids, or their grandkids or whatever. It's like the tree of generations or whatever. So that's their family. So when I say my family, I mean me, my children, and my grandchildren, and obviously my mom, but separated my mom. So my family is my children and my grandchildren, and I have 7 grandchildren, and obviously one passed away. Um, so there's been a lot of changes going on in my family, and a lot of huge changes. And it's been very overwhelming, and I'm trying very hard to keep myself pulled together. And I have come a long way, and I'm very proud of myself. And I was talking to my therapist not this past session, but the one before. I believe it might have been one before that. Anyway, irrelevant. Um, I had held my arms up and I said, "Look, see, I was really proud of myself because I showed you my scars, but um, I had not been picking up my skin, and with everything that's been going on, that's a big deal for me, and I used to hide my scars, but I don't now. They are my survival scars, and I do a lot of artwork and crafting and stuff, and I actually made a sign up. It says I am not my scars. And then I under it I have a self harm survivor, and that is a true fact, 100%. So and it's I'm probably talking in circles, but I'm in my head, but probably I don't know. Anyway, I apologize. I mean, I do, but this is the effect that it has had. It is a very serious subject. I have another friend whose child has been a victim to this, and fortunately lived. My grandson, my daughter actually donated my grandson's organs, and saved 3 baby girls. And there are 3 girls that walk this earth right now because of him. And one of them literally has his heart. And I know that for a fact in the most tragic situations, there is something good that comes out of it. And I had a hard time dealing with that and admitting and realizing that because somebody had come up to me at the hospital when he was on life support, and they're like, maybe something great will come out of your grandson dying. And I looked at her and I said, what the would be good at my grandson dying? And I went from there to the second floor to the hospital room, and I pulled my daughter aside and I said, if you don't do anything I ever ask you again, will you please do me one favor? Donate his organs. Don't let his life be in vain. And she didn't hesitate. And we got a hold of IOPA, which I don't know if you're familiar with IOPA. They're a wonderful organ donation organization, and they did the organ donation. And that's been a very big um, focal point for me, if you will. I get updates on the progress of the girls he donated to. I do have updated things on them, and I do have an opportunity to write them if I want to. I don't know exactly who they are. Obviously, I'd have to go through um, the organ donation company first. But over the years, I have been trying to heal the best I can in order to get stronger, in order to be able to handle um, some things that are going on now. And so I wasn't ready for this subject. And I guess a big, long way around it, I was not ready for this subject. So I am taking the opportunity now. I mean, nobody's ever, I guess, really ready for this subject, but I didn't think I was going to be. I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle it, but I'm going to do it. And if you've listened to my podcast before, I am very candid, very open, and I have broke down many times crying in my podcast because this is my life, this is real life, and this is a fact. And my grandson is not and will not be the only victim in this world that has been affected by shaken baby syndrome. So, on that note, we're going to get started. I printed this information out and I'm going to read it to you as it says. So, we're going to go over it together. I have not pre read it prior to. I had another one printed out, but it really didn't look like a bunch of information for me. And it just like really matter of fact information. Like, no, this ain't going to work. So, I actually just printed this out a bit ago. So, again, it is from the American Association of Neurological Surgeons. And it says shaken baby syndrome, also known as shaken impact syndrome, is a serious form of abuse inflicted upon a child. It usually occurs when a parent or other caregiver shakes a baby out of anger or frustration, often because the baby will not stop crying. Babies have very weak neck muscles. That cannot fully support their proportionally large heads. Severe shaking causes the baby's head to move violently back and forth, resulting in serious and sometimes fatal brain injury. These forces are exaggerated in the shaking if the shaking is interrupted by the baby's head hitting a surface. Shaking with or without the sudden deceleration of the head when it impacts a surface can cause some of the following: subdural hematoma, which is a collection of blood between the surface of the brain and the dura. That is the tough, fibrous outer membrane surrounding the brain, the dura mater and stuff. This occurs when the veins that bridge from the brain to the dura are stretched beyond their elasticity, causing tears and bleeding. I'm probably butcher this word. Subarachnoid. I used to be able to do this. Subarachnoid hemorrhage. If I'm mispronouncing that, I mean, um, which is bleeding between the arachnoid web-like membrane surrounding the brain, filled with spinal fluid, and the brain. So it's a web-like membrane that surrounds the brain that's filled with spinal fluid, and between that and the brain, it has a hemorrhage, which is bleeding. Direct trauma to the brain substance itself, caused when the brain strikes the inner surfaces of the skull. So your brain basically would hit the skull and have an impact on the skull. Shearing off or breakage of nerve cell branches in the cortex and deeper structures of the brain caused by violent motion to the brain. So your nerve cells could break off and better connected basically to the brain um, and sever them. Further irreversible damage to the brain substance from the lack of oxygen if the child stops breathing during shaking. Now, I'm going to side here. When my daughter called me, she had told me that the baby had stopped breathing. She had given my grandson CPR. And then when he was in the ambulance, he coded again and they had to give me CPR again. And it was then after that fact um, that he was then put on life support. And a few days, that was on the 19th of January, 2016. And on the 23rd, my birthday, um, they pulled him off life support and he passed away. Um, he was um, he was declared brain dead. Um, Further damage to the brain cells when injured nerve cells release chemicals that add to oxygen deprivation to the brain. So when your brain cells are damaged and your nerve cells are injured, um, it can release chemicals that basically deprive your brain of oxygen. Other injuries related to this abuse include the following: retinal hemorrhages, ranging from a few scattered hemorrhages to extensive hemorrhages involving multiple layers of the retina. Now, with my grandson, they said there was no lacerations, no contusions, no bruising, no trauma to his body whatsoever. He was just hemorrhaging at his eyes. His eyes were bleeding. And that was the only thing that they could find. Skull fractures resulting from impact when the baby is thrown against a hard or soft surface. Fractures to other bones, including the ribs, collarbone, and limbs. Bruising to the face, head, and entire body. Then it says prevalence and incidence. This syndrome is primarily seen in children younger than age 2, with a majority of cases occurring before the baby's first birthday. The average victim is between 3 and 8 months old. My grandson was 2.5 months old when he passed away. However, children up to the age 4 have been victims of this abuse. The perpetrator of the abuse is most often the father, boyfriend of the mother, female babysitter, or the mother. Parents experiencing stress because of environmental, social, biological, or financial situations may be more prone to impulsive and violent behavior. Those involved with domestic violence and or substance abuse may be at a higher risk of inflicting this abuse. The National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome estimates that there are between 600 and 1,400 cases in the U.S. a year. Because there is currently no reliable method of collecting these statistics, the true incidences are unknown. The syndrome is most common cause of death and long-term disability in infants and young children who are victims of abuse. I know that obviously there are some children that survive, if you want to call it that, and they are forever, um, their life is forever altered. There was significant damage to them, which we will continue on with this, and um, yeah, very sure that we'll be talking about that. Um, so it's the symptoms and signs. There is often no obvious external evidence of injury or physical signs of violence, resulting in an underdiagnosis of the syndrome. Caregivers and even physicians who are not aware of what has happened to the baby may not detect injuries that are primarily internal, attributing to the baby's fussiness to an underlying cause such as a virus. Symptoms vary and are caused by generalized brain swelling secondary to trauma. They may appear immediately after the shaking and usually reach a peak within 4 to 6 hours. The following signs and symptoms may indicate shaken baby syndrome. So these are the following signs that may indicate it. Altered level of consciousness. Drowsiness accompanied by irritability. Coma. Convulsions or seizures. Dilated pupils that do not respond to light. Decreased appetite. Vomiting. Posture in which the head is bent back and the back is arched. Breathing problems and irregularities. Abnormally slow and shallow respiration. Cardiac arrest and death. Physical findings upon medical examination are the following. Retinal hemorrhaging. Closed head injury bleeding. Subdural, epidural, subarachnoid, um, subgangular. I can't even pronounce that now. Subgaleal. I can't even say it. Anyway, galeal. I think subgaleal. That's what the word we're gonna call it. Lacerations, contusions, concussions, bruises to the face, scalp, arms, abdomen, and back. Soft tissue swelling that may indicate a fracture to the skull or other bones. Abdominal injuries, chest injuries, abnormally low blood pressure, tense fontanel, which is the soft spot. Suggested diagnosis studies are the following: history, optic fundus exam for retinal hemorrhaging, computed tomography, maybe a learn how to talk here, CT or CAT scan of the head and the stomach, an MRI, lumbar puncture and precautions, skeletal survey, nuclear scan, drug screening, and routine blood samples. Prognosis. And this is actually not a very lengthy printout, actually. So I don't really know how long this podcast is going to be, but I'm actually almost done reading it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be done talking. Prognosis. The prognosis for victims of shaken baby syndrome varies with the severity of injury, but generally is poor. Many cases are fatal or lead to several neurological deficits. Death is usually caused by uncontrollable increased intracranial pressure from, from cerebral edema, bleeding within the brain, or tears in the brain tissue, or tears, not tears, I'm sorry, bleeding within the brain or tears in the brain tissue. However, even babies with injuries that appear to be mild may show developmental difficulties. Now, in researching some stuff, and I should have printed it out, I didn't think about it actually until now. When I was going over and researching my grandson's case and all of that stuff, I can't remember off the top of my head, and I'll have to do some research on it. Maybe I can talk about my next podcast. There's actually a disease that mocks shaken baby syndrome. I can't remember what it's called, but I know there was a lot of cases that I had read about where their children were mistaken for shaken baby syndrome, and they actually had these particular diseases or whatever, and they mimic the symptoms of shaken baby. Um, Obviously, my grandson has been gone for about 8 years, and he was cremated and buried. So obviously, there'd be no way to resume anything, which obviously we wouldn't anyway. Um, but it's scary to think about, because while this is a very, very serious reality in the world, there are also situations that um, the blame and the result, I guess, of I don't know the word I want to use. Um, what they want to say is the cause might not always be the case. And sometimes I think, especially when it comes to a child, a little baby, more people are apt to just want to get an arrest and a prosecution because, for one, they don't want that on their hands, but two, I think they're trying to bring, obviously, a baby is, or any child for that matter, is a very delicate, heartbreaking subject. And so when there is a case that involves an infant or a young child, it takes a different toll, I think, on people than what it does on somebody else, which obviously anybody it should take the same kind of toll. But I understand that obviously with a child or an infant, it's a whole different ball game. And so I'll have to think of what that disease was, or and then hopefully if I remember my next podcast, I'll mention it and see if I can find information on it. Maybe I'll do a podcast on it. It wouldn't hurt. So anyway, it says typically surviving babies with this syndrome may develop some of the following: So, any babies that survive shaken baby syndrome, the impact if they survive it can develop some of these following disabilities: cerebral palsy, paralysis, vision loss or blindness, mental retardation, which I do not like that word. To me, retarded is a bad word in our family. I have a granddaughter who has Down syndrome, and retarded is a bad word. I like to say mentally challenged, um, which my granddaughter is not. Just because you got Down syndrome or something like that doesn't mean that you're mentally challenged. Actually, um, I think the world needs to be a lot more like her. Epilepsy and seizures. Prevention. Shaken baby syndrome is completely preventable. Taking care of a baby uh, can present challenges, especially for first-time parents. However, it is important to remember that this is never acceptable. It is never acceptable to shake, throw, or hit a baby. I'm going to add anybody for that matter. But yeah, a baby. The following tips may help prevent abuse. So here are some suggestions um, that they have. Take a deep breath and count to 10. Take time out and let the baby cry alone. Call someone for emotional support. Call a pediatrician. They may be a medical reason why the baby is crying. Never leave a baby with a caregiver, a friend, or family member in which there is not a complete trust, like you don't trust them completely. And don't just leave them with anybody. Always check references carefully before entrusting a baby to a caregiver or daycare center. Now, I'm going to add to that because I know that there are parents out there that do extensive background on where to leave their child. Um, and you hear, and I'm going to say horror stories, of some family members and families that have actually lost their child in the care of a daycare center or a caregiver or a babysitter. Um, and they did all the right things. You know, they did the research on the facility or the persons, and they are now left in the trauma of their little innocent child is gone or forever altered. Um, and when my youngest daughter, um, it was not her son that passed away; it was my oldest daughter's. Um, but when my youngest daughter had a child, she has a little boy. When it was time to put him into daycare for work, because she had to go to work, she was very particular on, um, meeting people and wanting to interview them. And she had took me, she had took me on this one where she went to go talk to this one lady who had an in-home daycare, and we went to this apartment building. And the lady answered the door. She didn't have a very big apartment, but it was cute. And she had a lot of cats. And it was a two bedroom. She had her bedroom, and then the other bedroom was set up like a playroom. And she smoked cigarettes sitting at the table, which obviously her home. And then the play area, the play yard, was a little slab of concrete without any fencing around it. And I mean, obviously, I know apartments don't have big backyards, but um, so my daughter wanted me to go with her so that way um, I would get a feel on it too, and she could get my opinion separately. Um, so I was asking the lady a lot of questions, and she was saying, that if my daughter like didn't bring him over or whatever, she was still going to charge my daughter for it. But if she missed a day, the daycare lady, um, my daughter would still get charged for it. And I'm like, well, that's not fair because she would have to pay somebody else to watch them, you know. And there was a lot of, she was saying that at a set time, you know, they take a nap, which I understand that. And they had TV time where they sat and watched TV, you know, she said educational shows and stuff, which I understand that. There are a lot of educational shows. Um, and they was to eat at a certain time, you know, and all that. And my daughter, we actually were there for a little bit. And then we left, and my daughter was like, "No." She said, "When I walked in and I could smell the animals right when you walked in." She said, "She had all them cats." She said, and she was sitting at the table smoking. Um, no, no. And there was just some things that the lady had said that kind of flew up some flags with me as well. Um, but my daughter later told me, she said, "You remember that lady that we went over and spoke to?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Her daycare got closed down." And I'm like, "Really?" You know, what happened? And I forget what she said the reason was, but they had closed her daycare down. Um, so it was obviously she was very particular, obviously, on trying to do that. And so she had it set up where my grandson didn't go to daycare. I actually would drive over there every Sunday. I'd get up about 4 or 5 in the morning. I would drive over her house, um, and I would watch him for all of Sunday until the evening time. So she worked, and the other times she had it worked out with the baby's dad. Um, where basically he had my grandson on the days that she had to work because she worked alternating schedule. And the only day they didn't have coverage was Sundays. So then I watched him every Sunday. And that was me and him time, and I loved it. But then eventually, over time, when I started taking care of my mother, um, that was harder for me to do because I couldn't leave my mom. So then she ended up finding a in-home daycare and took him to, and now he goes to preschool. And my whole point to this is that there's nothing wrong with being selective, and there's nothing wrong with saying no to a daycare center or a person. Um, because even though sometimes you're desperate to find a place that you can afford, because daycare and it is ridiculously expensive. But I understand children are. I mean, it's a job. It really is a job, but it's expensive. It is unbelievably expensive, more so now than what it was back when my kids were young. Unfortunately, I never had to put my kids in daycare. I work third shift, and most of the time, and they were asleep while I was at work. And then when they were at school, I was asleep, so they never really knew I was gone. And they would come over to my mom's and sleep. And stay the night over here, and then I would get off work and come in. They'd go off to school, and they catch the bus from here because we're in the same school district. And they never knew that I was working because to them, I was always there with them. And they had no clue that I wasn't there at night. I was at daycare or I was at work. At daycare. Sometimes I feel like I was at daycare. But anyway, so that being said, as a parent, when you're trying to find somebody, obviously you want to find the cheapest and most affordable. But sometimes um, that's not always the best option because sometimes, and I'm not saying always, but sometimes you do get what you pay for. But I also do know that there are some true wonderful caretakers and daycare centers and preschools and human beings that are wonderful with children and do not rake you by the balls on money. So I do know those exist, even though they're probably few and far between. But just because you're in a bind or desperate to find somebody, it's okay to take your time to look. And I understand that it's not always the good thing to do because you're crunched for time, maybe your job switch or maybe you find a job or maybe your other daycare, for whatever reason stopped on you. But never never feel like you can't continue to look. So like if you find a place to put your child in daycare even temporarily, but obviously you don't want to, I mean, you just want to make sure that whoever your child is with, you're comfortable with. And, but also, too, you want to make sure you give your child stability in the same process. So there's a lot of fine line in there, and it's rough, especially if you're a single parent. I was a single parent, and at one point in time, I worked two jobs. I worked two jobs for 2.5 years because I was saving up money to buy my house. Because I wanted my kids to have stability. I didn't want to keep moving all the time because I moved a lot when I was a kid. And I did not want to do that to my children. My youngest daughter has only been to one school district. My other two children, um, my son has been to three, and my oldest daughter has been to two. And I say my son has been to three, but he was only in a kindergarten for 1 week at a school. And then I pulled him out when we came out to the district out here. Um, and then in the high school, uh, he was in the high school at a different district for a few years, and then we moved back out here. So that was the only change that they had. But my youngest daughter, she went to one school, uh, and so she didn't have a lot of changes in that sense. I had a purpose on why I worked two jobs, and then once I had bought my home, I worked just a little bit longer, and then I quit my second job um, because obviously that was my goal. So, but being a single parent is so difficult in so many ways. You have a lot of responsibility, but at the same time, um, you have a lot of limitations of how to handle things because you don't have a lot of choices. And if you don't have a very big support family or um, a go-to, if you will, to like a backup plan, a fallback, or even somebody that can actually give you a break. Because as a single parent, getting a break in itself is sometimes not existent, and that in itself can put a big strain on somebody and overwhelm somebody. And even though um, you may not have intentions, or it might not even cross your mind, or when you get to a certain point um, in your life where you are overwhelmed beyond belief. I mean, some people say, "Oh, I could never do that." Don't never say you couldn't, because you really don't know how far you could be pushed and how much you would not even realize where you're at on it. And you can be one of the most delicate and amazing parent, and it takes one moment, one moment, and so it's really important to um, make sure that you try to have a game plan with yourself to find ways to deal with yourself and calm yourself down, or change the moment around when it starts to escalate. And I understand that sometimes it's easier said than done because when you're in a certain frame of mind, it's not so easy to be coherent and reasonable. Because somebody that is not going through that moment the same way that you are, it's easier for them to make um, opinions on it, or accusations on it, or um, whatever. But it's always easy for somebody to have an opinion on something that doesn't directly affect them. They don't have to suffer the consequences of it, and it's really irrelevant to their well being. And it's easier to give advice on something when they don't have the repercussions or the consequences of it. Um, Not saying that people don't have, like, positive influences and stuff, but when you are faced with a situation such as an uncontrollable demeanor, if you will, upon yourself, your rationality of thinking clearly is not the same as what it would be not having that moment. So I guess you could ask you. It boils down to this: you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to kind of have a conversation with yourself on, okay, this is not normally me. I mean, this is not me. I would not do this. In my normal frame of mind, I would never ever harm my child or whatever. And a lot of times it's not an intentional thing. Sometimes it's surely, and I mean, undoubtedly an accident. And over and for a lot of reasons. So if you're honest with yourself and conversational have a pre-conversation with yourself on, okay, so even though this is not something I would do, let's hypothetically say that if I do get in that mode or in that level of anxiety or frame of mind and not rationally thinking, how can I go about removing myself from that moment to be more responsible in the care of my child? How can I be a more responsible and honest with myself parent at that kind of moment? And maybe have a game plan put into to place. I know a lot of people, and then maybe this sounds a little crazy as comparison, but there's a lot of people that have disaster prep kits and whatever, or they say, okay, in case of an emergency, I'm going to do this, this, and this. So what would it hurt to have a game plan for yourself and saying, okay, worst case scenario, say that I'm having a very overwhelming moment and I'm totally not in my right frame of mind, and I've got my children and my children are crying and there's something wrong, and I'm this and I'm so stressed out and I can't take this, and I can't get a hold of the other parent or whatever the case may be. How can I go about calming myself down and taking control of the moment in a more responsible, level headed, and honest way? And I say an honest way because, in all fairness, you can have anything said to yourself and any kind of game plan you feel like putting in place. But if you're not honest with yourself about implementing it, then it's just words in your head. And it's not going to get you anywhere. And it's definitely not going to help your child. So, being honest with yourself on what is rational for you, something that is, because nobody knows you better than you do. I mean, in all honesty, if you're honest with yourself. And I don't mean degrade yourself and put yourself down, because that's not what it's about. It's about being honest with yourself on how would I handle a situation if I'm put in a situation and I'm not level-headed about it. So it's a matter of doing research on different coping mechanisms for you, but also too knowing the signs and symptoms of yourself on your reaction, on how you react with your child in that situation. So, like, if something was to trigger you, because obviously there's a lot of things that go on in society and in our past lives and stuff, to where we have a lot of things going on in our mental stability. And um, I understand that all too well. But being honest with yourself without degrading yourself is a huge key too. Because if you're putting yourself down and you're belittling yourself, then you're just escalating um, the negativity of your mental stability, of um, your self esteem, your personality, um, just you in general as a person. And if you are degrading yourself and putting yourself down, then you are putting yourself at a level that just adds to the negativity and the anxiety, and you're abusing yourself basically. And if you're in the mindset of abusing yourself, How are you going to be rational enough and coherent enough and responsible enough to not be abusive to anybody around you, let alone your child? Because I know sometimes as a parent, um, we get home from work or whatever, or day is stressful and our kids are nagging or fighting or whatever, and you get home from work, and especially if you're a single parent, your job never stops. You're continuously going in some direction. Um, and it's enough to make a person snap. But if you take on your regular mental stability state of mind, you as a person and a human being, and then you add everything else in the mix of your life on top of that. And then you've got the personalities and everything of your children and the people around you. Maybe you're arguing with your significant other, or maybe, you're struggling with bills, or you lost your job, or whatever, and the kids are getting on your nerves because they won't stop. And maybe they're not even fighting. Maybe they're just playing and laughing, but it's irritating to you and it's getting on your nerves and you've had enough, and then you snap. You yell at them, send them to their room, maybe you correct them, whatever it may be. And if, say, they, continue, or whatever the case may be, and you don't find a way to de escalate yourself, and then you just keep being amplified with everything else, and it just keeps stacking and adding to you, and you don't have a way to de-escalate yourself or calm yourself down or change the moment for yourself. It can be something just as simple as that. Something as simple as that. So having a way to be able to have a game plan for yourself, and have multiple game plans if you can, because sometimes what works at one moment might not work at another moment. It depends on where your mental state of mind is in that moment. And there are a lot of coping mechanisms to de escalate yourself, to redirect yourself. And you might have to start off small, with positive reinforcement to yourself. And I say that because, like me, for instance, I'm a self harm survivor, and I am a suicidal victim survival, and I've got a lot of things going on with me. And I have had to be honest with myself on coping with myself, dealing with myself. But in order to um, heal and get better, I had to be honest with myself on how I was going to achieve that and how I have been with myself. So all the time I would degrade myself, put myself down, abuse myself. I had to take that, and I'm still doing this, trying to redirect myself of everything negative that has been put and implemented into my mind and in my heart and my well being in my life. I've had to redirect that to something positive to overshadow all the pain and negativity. And it is not easy. And I told this to my counselor, I'm in preschool right now with it. And for all the negativity and all the pain and the part of me that wanted to kill me, I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to stop. But that person, I am trying to heal. And um, so I have to find other coping mechanisms to accommodate my moments. And my moments change and fluctuate depending on where I'm at mentally, my surroundings, um, and just my overall general self. And sometimes well, I don't say sometimes, I'm a huge overthinker. I'm a huge thinker. And sometimes I put myself in an anxiety attack, and I don't mean to, but I have all these things that go through my mind. Like I said before on one of my other podcasts, I'll be one of them people that are like, "Hey, how do you give a giraffe CPR at 3 o'clock in the morning?" So and that's honest. I'm being honest with myself, but at the same time too, I know that some coping mechanisms don't work with me, and I know sometimes I've had to redirect some and change them for the moment. And it's like, for instance, one night I was laying in bed and I was having a very bad anxiety in my head, and I was just crying uncontrollably, and I was rocking myself. I was trying to talk myself down, de-escalate myself. I was saying my ABCs in my head. I was counting. I was singing a song. Um, I was trying all kinds of stuff. It was the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I was trying all kinds of stuff, and I'm like, okay, this is not working at this particular moment. This episode, this particular um, situation that I was going through um, was not working. So I needed a change of scenery. So I'm talking to myself in my head. I'm like, okay, I can lay here in this bed. I can continue crying and continue getting overwhelmed. And it's not going to get any better. It's just going to escalate more. I'm going to end up making myself sick by crying so much. I need a change of scenery. I need to go outside and get some air. And it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I got up and I went outside. And it was cold. I knew there was snow on the ground. Um, and I took a couple of breaths of air and closed my eyes and I tried to feel the moment of, regrouping myself. And then when I was calm, I came back in, I laid down, and I went to sleep. And I'm not saying it's always that easy, but I knew ahead of time that the other methods that I had used had worked with me before. Because that's why I used them, because they had worked. And sometimes when my thinking or my overwhelming get to a place, I will start saying my ABCs in my head. And then every time I get to the point of saying, won't you say them with me, or however that end goes, I would take a big, huge, deep breath. And then I would say my ABCs again. And then when I get to the part of saying, now won't you say them with me, or whatever that saying is, I would take another huge breath. And I would do my ABCs again. And then it gets to the point where sometimes I didn't have to finish them. I was calm. And then I've learned not to take too many breaths at a time because you'll hyperventilate and that doesn't get you anywhere but more anxiety and a panic attack. Because then you're freaking out because you can't breathe. So don't do that. I've learned from experience, don't breathe too much like that. But the point of it is I knew some other methods that had worked for me. So when you're in your right frame of mind, that's the time to think rationally about yourself. That's the time to be honest with yourself and put a game plan and implement it um, on whatever works for you in the moment that you're experiencing. But also at the same time, there is no shame on taking a break. There's no shame in asking for help. There's no shame on saying, I love my kids, but right now I can't breathe. And you are more of a responsible parent than what you realize, especially in a moment like that. So don't beat yourself up. Don't abuse yourself in order to take control of a moment that you don't have control of. So knowing ahead of time, even though sometimes it may not be possible, but right now, if you're listening to this podcast, have a game plan. Even if your children are grown and say you have grandkids, doesn't mean it still can't happen. Because we all get to the point where we just can't handle it. We can't even deal with it. And it's not because you're a bad person or a bad parent or a bad grandparent or a bad caregiver or whatever. People have their moments. You're a human being. But at the same time, a child, a baby, is codependent on a human being that is not themselves. And if you're not equipped at that moment, be honest with yourself about it for the sake of your sanity, but for the sake of that child. And that is pretty much the way it should be, in my opinion. And I speak that sincerely from my own experiences in my life of my own grandson. He was a victim um, for a lot of reasons in a lot of ways. And I, I just say this is just very, nobody should have to bury their child. Nobody should have to bury a child, period. Especially when it can be intervened and prevented. So just remember that while you're a human being and you are going to make mistakes, it's okay to ask for help or research things that you don't know in order to protect yourself, but protect your child. Because it would be much, I would say this, wouldn't you rather do a pre-intervention on yourself than to have to plan a funeral service? Plain and simple. Wouldn't it be worth that? This is a real fact of life. This is a reality check of life. And I know that for a fact. Because it has severed my family. And it has killed my 2.5-month-old grandson. So I would have much rather I can't change the past. I can't get him back. I can't save him. I can't fix it. I can't even give you answers on a lot of it because they hurt too much to talk about. But I will tell you the impact of it is something I hope nobody ever has to go through. I should not have had to bury my grandson. But I did. And if you are suffering or going through some stuff, I pray for you very hardly. 988 is the suicide prevention hotline. I say it in every podcast, but I mean it sincerely. There is no shame in asking for help. That's the most biggest responsible thing you can do as a human being, let alone a parent. And I know this for a fact too, because it took me years to get help for myself. But I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I always say I'm trying, but you know what? I am trying, but I'm also doing. And it is done lot of, I'm regrowing, and for the first time in my life, I don't want to die. I don't want to intentionally die. And I have never been able to say that before in my whole complete life. And if you are going through something, please reach out. Even if you have to get a hold of me, I will talk you down. I will talk you through. I will give you words of encouragement. I will give you resources. I will give you an ear to listen, or, to listen with. I will give you a shoulder to cry on. There is always, and I say this with respect because I know it's easier said than done. I know that. I can give you tons of advice, tons of words of encouragement, tons of resources and directional stuff. I can give you my shoulder and my ear a million times. But unless you are honest with yourself on how you deal with yourself, and really honestly look at yourself in the mirror, do you see the reflection of what everybody has made you feel, or do you see your own reflection of you? That's the difference. Society and the reflection of what everybody has made you feel is what is beating you up inside, and is the reflection that reflects that mirror back at what you see yourself to be, not the reflection that really is your true beauty of who you are as a human being. Instead, you're painted with internal scars from people that don't suffer the consequences of your mental state of mind until it's too late. And please try to do your best to take a deep breath and remember that you matter. And try to take necessary precautions, if even to save your own life. That is what you are all about, and that is what you are worth. And so are your children, because they are a part of you. That's your little human being. That is a gift from God that you are blessed with. And I'm going to end my podcast here. But if you are going through something, please reach out to somebody. 980 is a suicide prevention line. They are skilled people. I think you can even do it anonymously. Talk to your doctor, pediatrician, maybe your preacher, clergyman, a friend, whomever that you trust. Because it is something to open up about. But more so, like I said, be honest with yourself and open up to yourself. And there's nothing wrong with having conversations with yourself. Because if you can't learn how to talk to yourself, who can? There's no shame in that. Hell, I say all the time that my other personalities are having meetings without me, and daggone it, I'm a part of them now. Because we're healing. We are teaching each other, and we are growing as a team. And I say that, I'm not being funny, because the part of me that wanted to die is now the one that's been reinforcing the positive reinforcement of me wanting to live. And that is one of the other biggest reasons why I do these podcasts. Because this is real life. This isn't a fabrication. This isn't a behind the scenes, whatever. This is straight up real life. And I'm straight up honest about it. I can't see who listens to these podcasts, and that's okay with me because I don't want to have to feel like I walk on eggshells just to um, suffice somebody else's opinion about me based off of being careful what I say in my podcast because I don't want to offend nobody. I don't care. This isn't about that. This is about being honest. This is about reality. And this is about taking your next breath without it suffocating you. And that's what I'm about. And if you have taken your time out of your life right now to dedicate it to listening to me and sharing your moment of life with me right now, I thank you from the bottom of my heart because that is the one thing in your life that you cannot get back and replace. And you have taken that time to share it with me. And that means the world to me. And on that note, I'm going to end my podcast. And I will try to remember to do research on finding that disease that mocks chicken baby. Or you might actually Google it, because Google knows everything. And then it doesn't understand anyway. That's a whole episode on Google. So anyway, I appreciate everybody. And much love to everybody tonight, wherever you are. I hope you're safe, if even in your own mind. Have a blessed evening. Good night.